On this edition of Read with Ronald, I read Toni Morrison's Beloved and watched the 1998 movie based on it. Before we get started, I want to let you know that this book has mentions of assault against a woman. It has infanticide, it has murder, and it has a lot of the atrocities and traumas of slavery mentioned. And I want to let you know that I will be going into the plot. I will be delving all into this book. I'll be discussing it in depth. So if that's not something you want to hear, or if you plan on reading this book or watching the movie, thank you for watching. Feel free to go ahead and click off here, and who knows, maybe once you read the book or watch the movie or both and you decide you want to come back and see if you agree with what I have to say or not, feel free. First published in 1987, Toni Morrison's Beloved examines the traumatic experience of American slavery and its effect on the lives, minds, and families of those it oppressed through the eyes of the formerly enslaved Sethe and Paul D. and Sethe's daughter Denver. Morrison drew inspiration for Beloved from a newspaper article detailing the real-life story of Margaret Garner, an enslaved woman who ended her infant's life to prevent the child from being subjected to slavery under fugitive slave laws. Beloved earned Morrison the Pulitzer Prize, the Anisfield Wolf Book Award for Fiction, and the American Book Award in 1988, and was a finalist for the 1987 National Book Award for Fiction. My history with this book starts back in high school. My junior year, my English teacher gave us this list of books to read, and we had to choose one and do a book report on it. Toni Morrison was on there twice, but I didn't know who she was. And I'll get into that later. But she was on there twice. The Bluest Eye was one of her books, and Beloved was the other. So, because I didn't know who she was, and the list that my teacher gave us was looking very not diverse, I chose a different author. But my friend chose The Bluest Eye, and she chose it, and she read it, and she did her report on it, and she's the one who told me about who Toni Morrison was. I was like, dang. I could have chose a black author after all. But because I didn't know who she was, I didn't choose her book. Fast forward to my last year in college, I'm taking African American literature, and my professor, shout out to her, decided that we were going to read Sula for class. Now, y'all know my thoughts on Sula, and if you don't, go watch this video. But y'all know my thoughts on Sula, and y'all know I enjoyed it, and that was a 5-star read. After I finished reading Sula the first time for that class, I was like, I want more from her. That summer, after the semester ended, I went and I bought Beloved. I bought it, and I started reading it, but I got busy. With this right here. I'm not going to beg y'all to buy it, but if you want to go buy it, go buy it. And because I got busy writing that, Beloved got put on the bookshelf, so I didn't finish it. The part with the cows is the last thing I remember reading in Beloved, so I didn't read it again. I didn't pick it up again until this year when me and Tati read Sula. And before I read Sula, I read Love. Love is my second Toni Morrison book, and like title, I love this book. I loved this book. It was sad like Beloved is, but it was a good read. 5-star. Love is a 5-star. Sula's a 5-star. And I'm gonna get to my rating on Beloved in a minute. But after I read this book and then I read Sula again with Tati, I was like, I need more from her. So then the next book I went to, of course, was Beloved. And that's how I got that book. It's February 8th. It's about 2 in the morning. I've just started reading Beloved by Toni Morrison. I've really enjoyed the story so far. Like I said before, Toni Morrison makes me feel like I can't write, and her writing is just so good. It makes no sense. Beloved, it follows Sethe. She is a black woman who was enslaved at a farm called Sweet Home, but she ran away and now she lives in Ohio. She lives in house 124 with her daughter Denver. Her mother-in-law, Baby Shucks, is dead, and her 2 sons, Howard and Boogler, they've run off. They've been scared away by the house because the house is hunted with the spirit of Sethe's deceased daughter, Beloved. Now, let me say this. Because Beloved is such a popular book, and it's, in my opinion, it's Toni Morrison's most popular work, we all know how Beloved actually died. But at the point in the book where I'm at, we haven't gotten the reveal of how she died yet, so as of right now, all we know is that Beloved died and that her headstone is pink with pink chips in it, and Sethe had to sleep with the engraver just for him to put the word Beloved on the headstone. That's all she could get with 10 minutes with the engraver. This story, it kind of jumps around a lot. Like, some parts will be in the present, some parts will be like in the past, like when Sethe first ran away, and some parts will be even further in the past. At at Sweet Home. Basically, Setha was coming home. She runs to the chamomile, which causes her legs to itch. She goes to like a water pump to rinse her legs off, which causes her to take off her stockings and shoes. And when she comes home, Paul D is at her house. Paul D is one of the men who were with her at Sweet Home. It was her, Paul D, Baby Shucks, who was her mother-in-law, and Hallie, who was her husband. There was also Paul F, Paul A, Sixo. Setha was married to Hallie. That was her husband. They were together for 6 years. He's not around in the present day. We don't know where he is. And Setha's not sure whether he's alive or dead. Baby Shucks is his mom. He worked hard to buy Baby Shucks freedom. He gave up 5 years of Sabbaths so that he could purchase Baby Shucks freedom. It's because he purchased his mother's freedom, which is why Setha decided to marry him, because all of the men at Sweet Home, like the black men, when Setha first came to Sweet Home, she was 13, and they all kind of like waited around for her to choose which man she would be with. And while they waited, they committed bestiality with some of the calves. And so, like I said, Sweet Home was the farm that they were enslaved on. It was run by the Garners, who I guess were nicer masters. I don't really like to call them nicer because they still had slaves. But Mr. Garner referred to his enslaved men as Sweet Home men, and it was because of this title that the men all waited around for Setha instead of basically forcing themselves on her, because she was the only woman on the plantation aside from Mrs. Garner. But because Mr. Garner prided them and prized them so highly to the other plantation owners that they basically acted like they had some sense. Paul D, he comes to visit Setha, and Setha offers for him to stay the night. And so when he goes into the house, he's like, what kind of evil do you have in this house? And Setha's like, it's not evil, it's just sad. She explains that it's the spirit of her daughter, Beloved. She says that the spirit is a baby and it doesn't know any better. And Setha just wishes that she could explain to Beloved why Beloved died the way that she did. But Beloved is just very sad and very angry about the fact that she's dead. Setha's kind of an emotionless person because of her experiences in slavery. So she's kind of emotionless. She just kind of treats Beloved kind of like Beloved's just an everyday thing. It's really Denver who kind of like enamored with Beloved, because Beloved has basically caused them to be lonely in the community. And so Beloved is basically like the only thing that keeps Denver from feeling lonely. But when Paul D comes around and he and Setha talk, and they basically reminisce on Sweet Home, that causes Denver to feel lonely and jealous because she feels like Paul D is taking Setha away from her. When Beloved starts acting up, Paul D chases Beloved off. And basically that causes Denver to be lonely, and that causes her to dislike Paul D even more. And so with Beloved chased off by Paul D moves in with Setha. They go upstairs to have a rendezvous in bed, but the rendezvous doesn't last very long, and they end up disgusted with each other. Setha has scars from being whipped on her back, and she was told that they look like a tree. And so she calls the scars on her back the tree. At first, Paul D, he's really tender, but after they have their rendezvous, he's like really disgusted. He's like, that's not a tree, that's just scars. And he reminisces on his time at Sweet Home, where he had a tree that he would go sit under. He called it Brother. And he compares himself to Sixo, who I said was one of the men on the farm. Sixo, he was the only man that was not interested in Setha, because he used to walk miles to go see a woman that they called the 30-mile woman. They called her that because he walked 30 miles to go see her. He went to go see her, but they could never meet up, and they were discovered by her master. So he was kind of been out of shape over that. But basically, Paul D compares himself to Sixo in that tree, and he feels like he doesn't measure up to Sixo as a man. And Setha, she's disgusted because she's let another man in her life. And Baby Shucks has told her that all men, all they do is they come in and they wreck shop and then they leave. And that's what she believes. Basically, Paul D has proven that right. He's come in, he's basically chased Beloved off, chased off her sense of normalcy. He's reopened her emotions, basically caused her to realize how emotionless she was. She notices how different her life is now that Paul D is in her life, and basically he's come in, he's wrecked shop. He hasn't left yet, but we'll see how it goes. And of course, Denver doesn't like it, because Denver doesn't like that Paul D has come in and disturbed the normalcy of her house, and basically caused her to be even more lonely, because he's chased off Beloved, who she felt kept her company, and he's taken Setha's attention off of her onto himself, and so she feels even more lonely now than she did before. And so we find out that Setha, right before she left Sweet Home, she was assaulted by some of the white men at Sweet Home, and so when she went to tell the new owner, because Mr. Garner died, so when she went to tell the new owner, he basically whipped her. She was more focused on the fact that they stole her breast milk that was for Beloved, because she had just had Beloved, and she was pregnant with Denver at the time. And by this point, she had sent off her children to go up north to escape to freedom. She decided to run, and so she ran all the way to Ohio. By the time she got to Ohio, she was exhausted, and she collapsed from exhaustion, and she was discovered by this white girl named Amy, who was going to Boston looking for velvet. Her mother was indebted to some people, and so because her mom died, Amy had to work off her mom's debts, and so she basically got Setha settled, and Setha basically named Denver after Amy. So that's basically what's going on so far. Setha is haunted by the memories of Sweet Home. Polly is also haunted by the memories of Sweet Home. Denver, she doesn't know anything of Sweet Home because she was born after it, and Setha's trying to keep her away from slavery because I think slavery is still a thing at the time of this storyline. So far, I'm enjoying it. Even though these storylines are sad, they're real. They're sad, but they're real, and I think that's what I really love about Toni Morrison's work. They're real. They reflect real life. You can relate to her characters, no matter how sad the storyline is. It's still February 8th. I'm about 100 pages into Beloved. And so here's what's going on. Denver is lonely. She's jealous because Paul D is stealing all of Setha's attention away from her. And because he's chased off the spirit of Beloved now, Denver basically asks him, how long is he going to be staying? Because she's like, look, you're not a permanent guest here, so you need to, how long you going to be here? And that upsets Setha, and that causes him and Setha to argue over him being there because of Denver's question. Paul D is like, well, maybe I should just go. And Setha's like, no, don't go. And Paul D's like, I don't mind staying, but if I stay here, I'm not going to sit up here and hold my tongue just because Denver doesn't want me to be here. To kind of like lessen the tension, Paul D decides to take Setha and Denver to a carnival that is black people only, I guess. It's Black People Day at the carnival, so they decide to go to the carnival. Setha decides to dress up because it's a special occasion, but Paul D and Denver, they don't dress up. And so basically the carnival turns out to be a ripoff. You know, all of the acts, because it's Black People Day, they don't really put their best foot forward, and they're rude to the black people, the patrons, the black people. They don't care that the acts aren't doing their best because to them it's like it's a reprieve from a hard life, so they don't really care. They're just happy to have a reason to be happy for once. When they go to the carnival, Setha notices that like their shadows, her, Paul D, and Denver's shadows, they seem like they're holding hands, and then on the way back it seems like their shadows are still holding hands. And Denver, she starts coming around to Paul D. She starts to realize that he's not that bad. And so basically, they all start getting comfortable with being around each other. And just as they're getting comfortable being around each other, a woman dressed in all black comes up out of the water. And she comes and she goes and sits in front of Setha's front yard on a tree stump outside of her house. When everyone gets home, they see this lady. And Setha, she gets really nervous very quickly and she runs off to the bathroom. And when she comes back, they discover that the lady is possibly sick, very thirsty. She drinks a lot of water. And when they ask her her name, she says that her name is Beloved. And so Denver, she takes to Beloved very quickly. She's caring for her, trying to get her back to her full strength. And when Beloved gets enough strength, she's all up under Setha. She's asking Setha all types of questions. She asks Setha about her mother, and we find out that Setha doesn't remember really much about her mother, except for the fact that her mother had this circled cross under her breath that was a mark. And that was what Setha's mom told her was the way for Setha to identify her as her mom in case she ever died. Setha's mom was hung for some reason. And when Setha tried to identify her, she couldn't because her mom's body was so messed up that she couldn't identify her. And she also remembers that the lady who was kind of like more of a mother to Setha than her mom was, the lady told her in their native language that Setha no longer remembers. She told her that her mother had killed all of her other children. that were products of being assaulted by, like the masters and stuff. She killed all of those children by throwing them in the water on the way to America when they were on the slave ship. She killed all of those children by throwing them into the water, but she kept Setha because Setha's father was black. And Beloved, she also asked Setha about her diamonds. That brings up a memory for Setha of when she first married Hallie, how she had basically like taken a whole bunch of fabric from Mrs. Garner to sew together for like a mock wedding dress because she wanted her marriage to Hallie to be like something special. And so she sewed together a mock dress of Mrs. Garner's stolen fabrics. She chose fabrics that she knew Mrs. Garner wouldn't really notice as missing because she knew she had to return them all or else she would get in trouble. And so basically when she and Hallie got married and they had their consummation in the cornfield, Mrs. Garner, she gave Setha some diamond earrings to celebrate the marriage. Setha no longer has the diamond earrings in the present day, and so Denver starts becoming suspicious of Beloved because she's wondering how Beloved knows all this stuff about her mother that she doesn't know. And Paul D, he's not comfortable with Beloved because he feels like just as he, Setha, and Denver were starting to become like their own type of family unit, here comes Beloved interloping on it. So he questions Beloved on her origins, and Beloved says that she came from a long way away and she walked there and she doesn't have no one else in the world. She's basically alone, and Paul D, he doesn't believe her. He's like, how could you walk here and your shoes are new? And so basically Beloved, she gets very upset and she ends up choking on her food, causing Denver to take her away. Denver uses this as like a way to get Beloved to finally sleep in her room because that's what she's been wanting, and she's very happy that Beloved is there. And so while Denver and Beloved leave, Setha and Paul D, they argue again because Paul D is not comfortable with Beloved being there. He knows he can't put Beloved out because number one, it's not his house, which I was like, thank you, because it's not your house, it's Setha's house, and you can't put people at a house that you, like you just got here, Paul D, so you really shouldn't have nothing to say. You should be grateful that Setha even let you stay. Paul D and Setha, they argue for a little bit over what he said. Paul D reveals that Setha, when she was assaulted by the white men on the day that she sent her kids away, Hallie witnessed it. He was in the barn hiding and he witnessed it, and watching Setha be assaulted and not being able to do anything about it really broke his spirit. Setha takes that kind of hard, and basically she and Paul D talk some more. Paul D reveals that he couldn't really comfort Hallie because he himself had a bit in his mouth, and because he had that horse bit in his mouth, he couldn't really say anything to comfort Hallie. And having that horse bit in his mouth made him feel like less than a man. And so because he feels like less than a man, he really has no concept of what it feels like to be a man. And after opening up about the horse bit, Setha, she tries to comfort him, and he kind of like backs away from the comforting, and he realizes that he can never be vulnerable with Setha because he's worried that if he's vulnerable with her, it'll make her see him as less than a man. So he chooses not to be vulnerable anymore. And while that's going on, Beloved and Denver, they're upstairs, they're enjoying each other's company, they're dancing with each other. Denver basically reveals to Beloved that she knows that Beloved is the spirit that used to inhabit the house, and she is curious as to why Beloved has returned. And Beloved basically says that she's there for Setha, she's there only for Setha, and she doesn't care what happens to Denver or Paul D. She only cares about Setha and that she belongs there, and that Paul D did not chase her away as he thought he had. And so that kind of hurts Denver's feelings because she figured that maybe Beloved had come back for her because of how much time she spent being nice to the spirit. And she basically tells Beloved, oh, don't leave, please don't leave. And Beloved basically tells Denver, don't tell me what to do, I belong here, I'm only here for Setha, don't tell me what to do. They kind of have like a moment of silence, and then Beloved asks Denver to tell her the story of her birth. And then we could flash back to when Setha actually gave birth to Denver, and she basically gave birth to Denver on the river where Amy was rowing her across the river. She gave birth to her there, and once they reached the riverbank, they got Denver together, and that's where Setha and Amy parted ways. And Setha basically named Denver after Amy because Amy's last name is Denver, and Amy said, please tell your daughter that I'm the one that brought her into the world. You better tell her it was Amy Denver. And Setha's like, oh, Denver, that's pretty. And that's how Denver got her name. That's where I am in the book. I'm really enjoying this book. It's like I said, this is Toni Morrison, but Toni Morrison requires you to be knowledgeable in order to understand her works. You really have to like know what's going on and know your facts and know your history. But it's so rewarding when you do, because you can understand the storyline, you can understand what's going on. So I'm very much enjoying the story. I was not expecting Beloved to show up as a person. It really just shocked me that she came back as a person, because I wasn't expecting it. And it was just funny to me because she was like, "Oh, Paul D, you thought you chased me off? You thought you could get rid of me that easily? No. You don't want me here in spirit? Okay, I'll come in person." And I was like, "Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, Beloved. I see you." I thought she was just gonna like be quiet as a spirit and then resume being a spirit. I did not expect her to show up in person. When she said her name was Beloved, I was like, "Beloved, you came in person? How that works?" So I'm excited to see how Beloved is gonna like, her being in person is gonna affect the story. And I'm excited to see that eventual moment where Setha realizes who Beloved really is and kind of get that moment of confrontation between them. I'm excited to see that. So that's where I am in the book. Today is February 11th. I got about 85 more pages left in the book. Here's what's been going on. So after Paul D tells Setha about how Hallie witnessed her being abused by school teachers' nephews, she basically goes and sits on the front porch and she has a moment of silence to herself. After she learns the news, she like takes Denver and Beloved out to the clearing where Baby Shugs used to have her Sunday service, where she would encourage the people to release their emotions and just love themselves as whole people. And she reminisces on Baby Shugs and wishes how Baby Shugs was there to comfort her. And so while she's out there wishing for Baby Shugs and wishing that Baby Shugs was there to comfort her, she thinks about Baby Shugs and how Baby Shugs was a pillar of the community, and how Baby Shugs used to encourage the people. Like every Sunday, she would go out to the clearing and hold this service where she would encourage the people to release their emotions and love themselves and love their whole selves, because the rest of the world was not going to love them, because the world doesn't love Black people. And as she's thinking about Baby Shugs, she starts to kind of like feel bad, because she blames herself for Baby Shugs' death, because she says that Baby Shugs kind of started declining after Setha arrived. And so we find out that after Setha got help from Amy to deliver Denver, she got across the Ohio River because she came across this man named Stampede. And Stampede basically used to ferry people who was on the run across the Ohio River to get them to freedom. And then after Stampede got her across the river, then she got help from this lady named Ella. Ella took her to 124, where she was greeted by Baby Shugs. Baby Shugs basically got her together, got her cleaned up, and got her taken care of. Setha was basically free for about 28 days before everything went wrong. While Setha is sitting in the clearing, wishing for Baby Shugs to comfort her, she wishes for Baby Shugs to like rub her on the back of her neck, how Baby Shugs used to when she was alive. And so she feels herself starting to be rubbed on the back of the neck, and it's comforting. But then she feels like whoever is rubbing her on the back of the neck starts choking her out. And as she's being choked out, Denver and Beloved, they rush to help her. Denver's all concerned because she's like, "Oh my gosh, you were choking. And Beloved basically like starts trying to calm Setha down and starts kissing her all over the face. And after Setha recovers from being choked out, she basically realizes that she wants Paul D to stay with her, but she's having a hard time accepting it, because since her emotions are starting to be reopened after him coming back, she's having a hard time with her emotions because she's had them shut down for so long. It's from the trials of life and the trials of being an escaped slave and all. She's had her emotions shut down for about 18 years. It's been a mess. When the three of them arrive back home, Denver confronts Beloved and she's like, "I know it was you that was choking Setha out." And Beloved is like, "No, it wasn't me. You saw me over there. I healed her neck, didn't I? I made sure she was okay, didn't I?" And Denver's like, "Doesn't change the fact that you did it." After Denver confronts Beloved, she starts to question whether Beloved really was the one who caused the choking. And when they arrive home, Setha gets home before the girls do. And when she gets there, she sees Paul D in the bathtub. And basically, she and Paul D, they start flirting with each other, and then they go do what they do in the bedroom. And then Beloved arrives home without Denver. And Beloved grows jealous of Paul D, because basically Paul D is taking Setha's attention away from her and bringing it to himself. After Denver confronts Beloved on her possibly choking Setha, we get a backstory on Denver. and what it was like for her growing up. She was very lonely, and the other kids in the community would not talk to her, they would not play with her because of the controversy surrounding Seta and what she had done. Denver learned to read and write by sneaking out to go to a neighbor's house, and the neighbor caught her sneaking to catch the lessons and basically invited her in. And the other kids, they would not interact with her until one day a kid asked her a question, and then she went home and asked Seta the question. And when Seta answered the question, Denver couldn't hear the answer because she lost her hearing, and her hearing was gone until Beloved, as a spirit, tried to crawl up the stairs, and Denver heard her crawling, and that's when her hearing was returned. And it was after Denver got her hearing back that Beloved started acting up deliberately as a ghost when she was throwing stuff around and messing stuff up. At first, it was just on a whim, like on accident, but then after Denver got her hearing back, she started doing it purposely. And the question that caused Denver to lose her hearing was her asking if Seta had been jailed for murder. After we learned the backstory on Denver, we get Paul D's backstory. After Seta escaped from Sweet Home, he had the bit put in his mouth. He tried to kill his new master, and he was led on a chain gang to Georgia to be put in jail. He was put in this jail box in the ground. So like 3 of the walls were wooden, and then 1 was dirt. They were jailed there, and in the morning they would all be chained together, and they would have to perform degrading acts for their jailers who forced them to do it at gunpoint. And while he was jailed, he had to endure a lot of things that dehumanized him and emasculated him and made him feel less than a man. And then while they were down there in the jail, it started raining. It was 48 men on this chain gang, and it started raining, and they all collectively made the decision to escape their jail cells while it was raining. So when it became muddy enough, they crawled through the mud, and they kept crawling until they reached a Cherokee camp full of sick Cherokee people. And the Cherokee people basically helped them get out of their chains. And Paul D was the last one to leave the camp, and he says that the Cherokee people told him to get north. All he had to do was follow the fruit blossoms on the trees, and so he followed those blossoms up to Delaware. And then after he stayed for about 18 months in Delaware, he made his way over to 124. By the time he got to 124, his feelings were closed off. He kind of just compacted everything away and just kind of like to not think about it. But as he's been staying in 124, he starts to realize that he's getting tired of being there. He's having what he calls a house fit. A house fit is the feeling a man starts to get when the woman's house starts to bind them. And so basically he starts feeling bound in Seta's house, and he can't understand why. And he goes from sleeping in Seta's bed to sleeping in a rocking chair. Then he goes from the rocking chair to sleeping in Baby Suge's old room. Then he goes from Baby Suge's old room to sleeping out in the shed. And he doesn't realize why he's feeling this way, but what he does realize is that the house fit is not being caused by Seta, but instead it's being caused by Beloved. Beloved comes out to him in the shed one day, and she basically lets him know that she wants to sleep with him. And Paul D, he does it, and as he's doing it, his emotions that he's shoved down and basically tried to compact away, they start to come out. And so a few days later, Denver, she's still desiring Beloved's attention, and so she has started to elongate their chores to last as long as possible so she can have Beloved's attention as much as possible before Seta gets home, because once Seta gets home, Beloved puts all her attention on Seta, and Denver has nothing. She's lonely. And so one day they're doing chores, and then they get cold, so Beloved says she's thirsty, so Denver and her go out to the shed to get a cider. And so while they're out there getting cider, the shed door closes, making it dark in the shed, and Beloved disappears. And Denver has no idea where Beloved is gone, and she starts crying because she realizes that Beloved is gone, and her worst nightmare has come to pass. She's alone again, and while she's sitting there crying, Beloved reappears, and she's like, I'm back. But Beloved starts acting weirdly and saying things that make Denver kind of like question what's wrong with her. And we get another flashback to Sweet Home. The Sweet Home men Like I said earlier, they believed that they were men because Mr. Garner said so. When the school teacher came around, he was the one who basically was like, y'all are not men, y'all are less than men. And so Paul D in the present, he's still feeling emasculated by what he had to go through with school teacher and then in the jail cells in Georgia. So he decides to take back his power of being a man by telling Seta that he's been sleeping with Beloved. But when he gets to her job to tell her the truth, he chickens out and instead tells her that he wants to have a baby with her. And Seta is taken by surprise, and they kind of like start having like lovey-dovey moments, not like bed moment, but like lovey-dovey, like holding hands and stuff out in public moments. And because of these renewed feelings for Seta, he decides he's going to resist Beloved and her temptations. But Seta, she does not want to have a baby with Paul D because she feels like she's too old to have a baby, and then she feels like Paul D wants to have his own baby with her because he doesn't like her girls. He doesn't like Denver or Beloved. And so she feels like Paul D is trying to create a space for himself and her family, and she doesn't really want to have a baby with him. And it's around this point that you kind of get the picture that everybody is fighting for Seta's love. Denver is fighting for her mother's love. Beloved is fighting for Seta's love because of what Seta did to her. And Paul D is fighting for Seta's love as a companion. They're all fighting separately for Seta's love, and they're all trying to get her to themselves. And we find out that when Paul D went to Delaware, the woman that he stayed with in Delaware for 18 months was the first woman he had an experience in bed with. The way he describes it, it was more like him being in love with her sheets, finally having a place to sleep, than it was him doing it with her. And Seta, even though she doesn't want to have a baby with Paul D, she does want him back sleeping in her bed. She wants that companionship that he brings, because just like his emotions are being reopened, her emotions are being reopened. They're starting to make an emotional connection with each other. And so they go back to sleeping with each other in the same bed. And Beloved does not like it. And she is falling apart, but the way it's described is like she's literally falling apart. Like her tooth comes out of her mouth and it hurts, but she doesn't cry. And she talks about how she's trying her best to keep her neck on her shoulders and to keep her arms from falling off. So I'm like, is Beloved falling apart? Like, and after we get the question of whether Beloved is falling apart, we get a whole chapter dedicated to baby Shugs and what it was like for her after she was freed by Howie. The flashback is out of order. The first part of the flashback is baby Shugs. She's free, and Seta and the kids have just arrived, and she's happy. And so Stampede, he brings 2 buckets of blackberries to the family to give them, to celebrate them all being free. And so they all decide to have a feast with all this food, but the feast is so extravagant that it causes the townsfolk to turn on baby Shugs and her family, because they feel like, well, why is baby Shugs so blessed and we're not? Why does she always have all the blessings? Why does she have her whole family coming out of slavery? Why does she got all this food? Why does it seem like she's never running out? Why is she always the one encouraging? And the biggest thing, how come she didn't have to run from slavery? How come she was freed by her son? She probably never had to work hard a day in her life. The townsfolk become jealous of her because she is doing as well as she is. And baby Shugs, she realizes that the townsfolk have turned on her out of jealousy. And she reflects on what it was like for her before she became free. And basically we find out that her slave name was Jenny Whitlow, and that her name that she goes by now, baby Shugs, it comes from her husband because that's what he called her. His name for her was Baby, and Shugs was his last name. But Mr. Garner is like, no, your husband's last name was Whitlow. That's what it said on his sales ticket. But baby Shugs chooses to go by baby Shugs because that's what her husband called her. And if he ever finds her again, she wants to be able to go by a name that he would recognize. And her husband is not Hallie's father, which makes sense what we learned earlier, that all her children were by different fathers due to how breeding was done during slavery, and how like the masters would basically just force certain slaves to sleep together to produce a child. So all of her children are by different fathers because of that. And her husband, they had an agreement that if they ever got the chance to run, whether they were together or alone, they would take it. And so her husband got his chance while he was by himself, and so he took it, and baby Shugs wasn't mad about it. And so when she got free, she took to finding out where all her children were, and her children are scattered all over the country, and some of them are dead. But basically, when she got free, Mr. Garner took her to this white couple named the Baldwins, who are anti-slavery, and they hire her and they put her up in 124 to live. And basically, she's allowed to live there as long as she does like all of the odd jobs that they ask her to do. And life was going well for her until it wasn't, when that feast rolled around. Because the next day after that feast, that's when school teacher and his posse, they show up in town to come reclaim Setha and her children. And none of the other black folks in the town warned Baby Shugs and Setha that school teacher and them was coming out of jealousy. They didn't warn them out of jealousy because they was jealous and crabs in a barrel mentality. They figured it had nothing to do with them, so they didn't warn them. Setha is the one who spots a school teacher coming, so she snatches up all 4 of her kids and she runs off to the shed. He blames Setha running away on his nephew for overbeating her. Like she deserved to be beat like an animal in the first place. And basically, he blames his nephew for overbeating her to the point that she escapes. He describes it like beating an animal. If you beat an animal, it'll be mean to you from now on. Basically likening Setha and her children to animals. And so Setha, she spots school teacher. She runs off to the shed with her kids. And basically, when school teacher and them come up to the shed, Setha has already killed Beloved. She's tried to kill both of her sons, and they're lying at her feet with their eyes open, and she's currently in the process of trying to kill Denver. But before she can succeed in killing Denver, Stampede takes Denver away from her, and school teacher and his posse, they leave because the kids are basically not able to work it because they're pretty much dead. So after school teacher leaves, the 2 boys are revealed to still be alive. And so the sheriff, he takes Setha to jail. Setha goes to jail with Denver in her arms because she does not want to let go of Denver. While she's in jail, life goes on for everyone else. And then back in the present, Stampede takes it upon himself to reveal to Paul D what she had done 18 years prior. And Paul D, he's kind of in shock because he's not really focusing on what Stampede is saying. He's focusing on the picture that was printed of Setha in the newspaper and how it doesn't look like her. But when he gets home, he gives the newspaper clipping to Setha, and Setha basically in a roundabout way explains to Paul D what she did. And Paul D, he's like, Setha, what you did was wrong. You behaved like an animal. And Setha's kind of taken aback, and then he leaves, but he tries to make it seem like an exit and not an escape. And Setha's like, oh, poor thing, he thinks I can't handle him leaving. And so when he leaves, she's like, well, thanks for coming, like, bye, basically just like, bye. And Setha's like, oh, well, because she's like, well, when you opened up to me, I can handle it, but when I open up to you, now you can't handle it. But after Paul D clears out of 124 Stampede, he regrets telling Paul D about what Setha did to her children because he didn't think on how that would affect Setha and Denver and their happiness. And so he wants to go to 124 to apologize and make things right because he feels like he owes that to Baby Shugs. And the only reason he even told Paul D was because he didn't want Paul D to be in the dark. He wanted Paul D to know the truth like everybody else in town knew the truth. Stampede wants to make things right with Setha and Denver because Baby Shugs' funeral was a hot mess. And basically, the town ostracized Setha and Denver out of her own mother-in-law's funeral. They didn't come to comfort her. They would not eat her food, and she would not eat their food. She wouldn't take any comfort from them. And basically, the whole town is against them. So Stampede, he makes the trip to 124 several times to apologize. But every time he makes the trip, he gets to the door, and he can't do it because he's like, it's like the first time he's had to knock on somebody's door because he's used to just being able to walk in and say hi because he feels like he's earned that right since he helped them get out of slavery. But he finds that he can't knock on 124 because he feels like he's not really welcome there, and he can't understand why he's not welcome there, so he always chickens out. When he goes up to the door, he just leaves. And so Setha, she's trying to put on like she's not really all that broken up about Paul D leaving, so she packs her feelings back up, and she takes Denver and Beloved ice skating. And so while they're out there ice skating, they have a good time, and they're laughing so hard that they start crying. But then Setha's crying goes from happy crying to sad crying because Paul D is gone. And when they get back home and they're drying off and getting themselves warmed up, Beloved starts humming this lullaby that Setha only hummed to her children. And Setha's like, I made that song up, only my children and I know it. And Beloved's like, well, I know it. And so that's when Setha starts realizing that Beloved is beloved and that she's come back to her. And so back in the day, Stampede, he tried to encourage Baby Shugs to not grow weary in good doing and to keep fighting a good fight. But Baby Shugs, after the town turned on her and after Setha did what she did, Baby Shugs was wore out. She was wore out. And so she was like, I don't want to do nothing else. Why am I going to do anything else for this town who does not appreciate me? And so she's wore out. And because she's wore out, she just accepts her fate and goes on living out the rest of her days till she dies wore out. And Stampede, he regrets trying to encourage her in the way that he did because he was super prideful about it. He just figured that she needed like a fire under her to basically like get back to doing good and encouraging the townsfolk, but he didn't realize that Baby Shugs felt worn out and betrayed. And so that's why he wants to make things right with Setha in Denver, because he finally understands how Baby Shugs feels. And he understands how wore out she was because now he's wore out. And so Setha is happy to have Beloved back, and she feels like her past, none of it matters anymore because she has her baby back. And she's like, my baby is back. So, and she knows everything. She knows the reasoning behind why I did everything, and she's come back to me. So she's just happy and she's floating on cloud 9. And Stampede, he finally works up the courage to go knock on 124's door, but nobody answers, nobody lets him in. And so he peeks in the window and he sees Denver and Beloved. He recognizes Denver, but he doesn't recognize Beloved. So he goes down the street to talk to Ella and see if she know who Beloved is. Ella being fake. Ella's like, Setha was my friend until she hacked up her children. She knows that Paul D is staying in the church in the cold, and Stampede is pissed off about that because he's like, that man is a black man just like the rest of us, and y'all know if he needed help, why aren't y'all helping him? And Ella's like, I'm not helping nobody associated with Setha, and he's probably there because he's the baby's real father and not her husband Hallie, and that's probably why he really came around. And Stampede reveals that he's the one who told Paul D because Paul D had no idea what Setha had done, and so that makes Ella regret not helping Paul D because she thought that Paul D knew and that he was basically there because of it. And we find out before that Stampede's name was Joshua, and that he changed his name to Stampede after he gave his wife to his master, because his wife was like, well, if you give me away to him and he has his way with me, then I'll be able to come back to you. Whereas if you don't, it could affect us both and we both could end up dying. And so he changed his name to Stampede after that because he felt like his dues were paid to slavery. And so after that, that's when he, I don't know if he ran or if he brought himself out. I don't know how he got out. But basically he got out and he helped other people get out. And so Setha, she, like I said earlier, she's floating on cloud 9 because Beloved's back. And she reflects on the days leading up to her running from Sweet Home. And basically what prompted her to start considering leaving was a conversation she heard about school teacher. He described the slaves as having human characteristics and animal characteristics. And so that shows how he saw the slaves as less than human, and he had been measuring them and asking them questions because it seemed like he was making plans for them. Setha didn't know what the plans were. She just knew that she didn't like them. And he is also forbidden Hallie from leaving Sweet Home to work off his debt because he needs Hallie back to stay at Sweet Home until his sons are grown enough to work the fields in his place. And so Setha realizes that school teacher has plans for them, and that's when she makes a decision that she does not want to stay at Sweet Home anymore. They don't necessarily plan on running away. They just know that they have to do something to get away. And so when the topic of running comes up, they take on to it. And so Setha, she sends her kids away ahead of her, but she stays behind for Hallie. And that's when the whole her being taken and assaulted by school teachers' nephews happen and Hallie witnesses. And basically after that, she goes on the run pregnant, and this is when we find out like the fate of the other people at Sweet Home. Only Setha and her children successfully escaped. 6-0 was burnt alive. Paul D, he was jailed. Hallie had his spirit broken, so we don't know what happened to him. And the fates of the others are unknown. And that's where I stopped reading. So I have like about 85, 90 pages left. Today is February 13th. So where we left off was the fate of the other people at Sweet Home had kind of been determined. Where I picked up was the I Am Beloved section. So the I Am Beloved section is like this. It's this section where Setha, Denver, and Beloved each explain their relationships to Beloved. So Setha is like Beloved is my daughter, and because she has returned, that means she's forgiven me, and Setha now has a new outlook on life. She sees what baby Shugs was looking for at the end of her life, which is looking for color. She sees things differently in the world, like her emotions are starting to open back up, and she's just very happy, and she feels like she can be at peace because Beloved is back, and she feels like Beloved has forgiven her, and once she explains everything and her reasonings for doing what she did, Beloved will forgive her and she'll never leave her again. Setha couldn't recognize Beloved because she was so distracted by Paul D, and so she feels like now that Paul D is gone, she can recognize Beloved for who she is, and she can love Beloved in the way that she wants to and give her full attention. Then we get Denver and her relationship to Beloved, and she sees Beloved, of course, as her sister. She wants to protect Beloved from Setha because Denver is scared of Setha. She feels like Setha could always potentially want to try and kill them all again for whatever reason, because Denver was a baby during the first attempt, so she didn't really understand why Setha did it. Even though she's been told, she doesn't really understand it. She also feels like Setha is the reason the Sons left. According to Denver, they left to go fight in a war, and so she feels like the reason the Sons left was to get away from Setha because she had tried to kill them, so they were, they're all scarred from it. And so they all want to be away from her. In Denver, she wants to protect Beloved from Setha because she doesn't want Setha to kill her again. And she says that she only feels safe in Baby Shug's room. And this is when we learn that Baby Shug's remodeled the whole house. She basically boarded up the back door because she was tired of having to enter through the back door to get into the house. She was like, the only way I'm entering this house is through the front door. And anybody who wants to come into this house is going to have to come through the front door and come see me. Denver is still hoping Holly is alive so that he can come and make their family whole again, and so that he can come and just kind of occupy Setha so that Denver can have Beloved to herself. And the reason Denver wants Beloved to herself is because Beloved kept her from feeling lonely when she was not able to hear and stuff like that. So that's why she wants Beloved to herself, because Beloved is her companion. And then we get to Beloved's relationship to herself. And this section, I had to read it a few times because the first time I read it, I was like, okay, so this is Beloved recounting her experience leading up to when she reappeared. But then I was like, wait, some of these experiences don't match what Beloved went through because it don't match what we've been told so far. Then I figured that maybe it was Beloved speaking for all the Beloveds, like all of the kids who have been lost to slavery, all of the kids who've had to suffer untimely and unfortunate deaths due to slavery, all the kids who had their lives ended early because their parents felt it was better off for them to be dead than to have to be in slavery. So I thought, okay, so maybe this is like an all-encompassing poem, like a tribute to all of the Beloveds. Then I was confused because then I was like, well, how would Beloved know all of this about all these kids? Like, how would she know? So I was a little lost in this section. So I'm wondering if maybe later on down in the book, we'll get a better reasoning. Like the next chapter after it gives kind of like a reasoning for some of the explanations. Like some of the instances was with Setha, some of the instances was with Denver, but a lot of it was just, we'll see. We'll see if it gets more explained later on into the book. But that's where I stopped reading because the I Am Beloved section was just, it took a lot to understand, and I still really don't understand it. So that's why I'm hoping that maybe later on we'll get more insight into it. And even if we don't, my interpretation might be what it is. Today is February 14th. It's Valentine's Day. I finished Beloved last night and 5 stars. After I finished the book, I went and researched the I Am Beloved section. From what I was able to find out, I was kind of right with my analysis, but I wasn't. It relies on Africanist religions and understanding of those things. The afterlife and how when you die, you kind of just become knowledgeable of past, present. And of course, I wouldn't get that because I don't follow an African religion. I'm a Christian. So that's why I didn't get it. But basically, I was kind of right in that it was Beloved's experience and it was the experience of other Beloveds. So I was kind of right. But because I didn't understand the context of what was supposed to be going on, the I Am Beloved section is written from her point of view, and she is still stuck at the mind of being 9 months because that's when she dies. So all of her dialogue, all of her monologue, all of her thoughts are going to be those of a 9-month baby. And so that makes sense. And I'm like, that makes a lot of sense, especially in this later part of the book. So from where we pick up at, Paul D, he is on the steps of the church drunk. He is pondering his life that led to him coming up to Ohio, and he wonders about what it would have been like had he not been a slave. And we find out that the other Pauls that were on the plantation, Paul F and Paul A, those are his half-brothers. which when I read that, I was like, it makes so much sense why y'all have the same name. Paul D, Paul F, and Paul A, and the last letters are the distinguishes of their last names. And so as Paul D is thinking on his experience, he realizes that Garner's death is kind of what ruined their experience at Sweet Home, because even though he was a slave, he and his brothers kind of felt like they were special because they didn't have the hard experiences of slavery that the others had. So like when Sixo and Baby Shugs and Hallie would tell their experiences of what they experienced on past plantations, the Pauls would like basically brush it off because they're like, oh, that's not our experience and we're special. But after Garner died and school teacher came and took over, they realized they wasn't special. And so when school teacher came, he would measure them, he would ask them questions, and basically he mistreated them. And he wanted to regress them. He wanted to take away the identities that Garner had established for them, and he wanted to regress them to what he believed a slave should be. And because he regressed them so heavily, it made everybody decide they wanted to run. And Paul D, he thinks back on the plan to run, and he thinks about how everything was so perfectly planned, but it all still went wrong. And what ended up happening was they had planned everything out, but school teacher got paranoid. He got paranoid, and he started, frustrating their plans a little bit by basically locking everything up and putting them on lockdown. But they still made a plan to run. But when the time came, Setha was pregnant, so she couldn't go along with the original plan, and Hallie wouldn't leave her behind. Paul F wasn't around, and Paul A was nowhere to be found, so Paul D and Sixo decided to execute the plan on their own with the 30-mile woman. They go to meet up at the creek, and they're discovered by school teacher and his posse. And so at first, school teacher came to capture them, but Sixo starts basically acting out, and school teacher's like, this one's not worth anything, so they burn Sixo alive, and he laughs as he's being burnt alive. School teacher decides that he's going to sell Paul D to recoup some of his losses. He's going to recover Setha and Hallie because nobody knows what happened to Hallie. The last anybody saw of him was the butter incident. School teacher decides to sell Paul D and basically use Setha to breed all new slaves because she's worth more. But Setha was able to get her children away because school teacher was distracted with Paul D and Sixo. So she was able to get her babies out, and then when she waited for Hallie and had what happened to her, she decided to run on her own without Hallie because he was nowhere to be found. And so that's how she ended up escaping. He ends up selling Paul D for $900 to Brandywine, and that's when Paul D decided to try and kill his new master because I guess his new master was worse than school teacher. So he tries to kill his new master, and that's how he got sent to jail in Georgia. And after he escaped from Georgia, he went up to Delaware to be with a woman, and he was there for about 3 years. And so when he was up in Delaware, he went to join up with a black regiment to fight in the Civil War, but it turned out to be no good. The black regiment fell apart. So then he got captured and taken down to Alabama to fight on the Confederate side, where he basically was like forced to be down there and fight for the Confederate side. And then after they lost, and after Paul D was officially declared free, he ended up making his way up to Ohio, and so that's how he ended up on Setha's porch. And so while Paul D is drunk on the steps of the church, Stamp Paid comes up to him and he apologizes for telling Paul D the way that he did, and he tells Paul D that he is welcome to stay with anyone in town because he's cleared up the misunderstanding that Paul D knew prior to finding out. But Paul D, he's not really like keen to take up the offer. They share their experiences. Stamp Paid talks about his wife Vashti and how he had to give her up to the master's son, and he felt like that was his dues to slavery, and that's what caused him to escape. And while they're sharing their experiences, Paul D breaks down and he starts crying. He's over being alive and over being black because it's too hard. And while they're doing that, Setha, with being glad that Beloved is back, she has neglected the rest of her life and has even neglected Denver. Nothing else matters to her except for Beloved. She has lost her job. They're poor, they're starving, and Beloved has basically not only taken up all of Setha's time, she eaten up all the food in the house. Basically caused Setha to kind of like, I guess, lose her mind a little bit. Because Setha is only focused now on Beloved. She's not even focused on Denver no more. So Denver takes it upon herself to be the one to take the helm of the family and steer it in the right direction. And because Setha is so wrapped up in Beloved and trying to explain to Beloved why she did what she did, but Beloved does not understand. She's just blaming Setha for leaving her and abandoning her. And basically they go at it with each other, and Beloved, she is very angry to the point that she's breaking stuff. She's slamming stuff. She's threatening to harm Denver and Setha with a poker from the fireplace. Setha and Beloved, they just kind of in a toxic relationship at this point, and they constantly go back and forth, and that's what causes Denver to decide to steer the family in the right direction, because she realizes that neither one of them care about her. So Denver, taking it upon herself to do what she needs to do, she goes to visit Lady Jones, who was the lady who was educating her earlier in the book, and Lady Jones immediately recognizes her. Denver asks Lady Jones for help, and she basically asks Lady Jones to employ her, and she, in return, she would work for food. And Lady Jones was like, well, I don't have no work for you, but I can give you some food. And so Lady Jones, she starts giving Denver food, and she gets the other townspeople to help give Denver food. And Denver, every time she gets food, she'll go to the person that gave them the food and she'll thank them for the food. And this is how she kind of starts building relationships with the people around town, and she realizes that the people around town are not that bad. And while she's getting along with the people around town, her home life is deteriorating. And Denver, she gets fed up with the deterioration of her home life, and she's like, you know what, I'm taking matters into my own hands. And she decides to apply for a job at the Baldwin's house, and the Baldwins are the people who housed Baby Shugs when she first was freed. And she meets Janie. Janie is the little girl that Baby Shugs met when she first visited the Baldwins, but now Janie is grown, and she asks Denver, a bunch of questions, and let her know that she's going to convince the Baldwins to take her on for the night shift so that Janie can have nights off to care for her family. And while they're talking, Denver explains the situation to Janie, but she doesn't tell it fully. She just gives enough information to basically let Janie know why she needs this job. Denver tells Janie that Beloved is their cousin. So Janie's like, oh, does the cousin have lines on her hands? And Denver's like, no. And Janie, she gets all excited. I guess it's a superstition that if somebody does not have lines on their hand, it's a visitation from the dead. And so she starts spreading it around town that she's like, oh my gosh, y'all, the baby that Setha killed is back. And everybody, they start taking satisfaction in the fact that the baby has come to basically collect on the dues of Setha killing her. And everybody's overjoyed. I'm like, y'all have some really disgusting and ugly hearts. When Ella finds out, Ella, she's not happy about it because she didn't kill her baby, but she lost her own baby. Basically, we find out that Ella understood why Setha did what she did, but she didn't approve of it, and she didn't like the way that it was done. And so that's why she kind of iced Setha out. But Ella, she doesn't like that Beloved has come back to wreak havoc on Setha, because she's like, nobody deserves to have their past come back on them like that. She wonders what it would be like if her own child that she lost came back to wreak havoc on her for whatever reason. So she decides to take it upon herself to stage a rescue mission for Setha. And so she and 29 other women, they go to the house to rescue Setha from Beloved. They stop outside the house at the edge of the yard, and they kneel down in the grass and they start praying. Denver, she's out on the porch. She's waiting for Mr. Baldwin to come pick her up because she's gotten a job. So she's waiting on Mr. Baldwin to come pick her up to take her to the house so she can get started. And Mr. Baldwin, he's on his way, and he's thinking about what it was like for him as a child living at that house and how every woman who's lived in that house has died. And basically, while he's on his way, he brings his hat down over his face. And we find out that he's grown weary of fighting slavery, because even though slavery has been declared officially over, he's become weary of fighting slavery and fighting racism because of what it's cost him and his reputation. And he's just tired, and he feels like it's a never-ending battle. So he's tired. He's on his way to get Denver. The 30 women are out on the yard. They praying, trying to get Beloved spirit up out of there. And Setha, she hears the ladies praying and singing, so she goes out to the porch with Beloved. And Beloved, she has grown big. She looks like a pregnant woman. She's grown big off of all of the food that she's been eating and basically just sucking the life out of Setha. She's like a succubus. She's been sucking the life out of Setha. When Setha and Beloved appear in the doorway, they see the women praying, and then Setha, she sees Baldwin coming down, but he has his hat on. And so because she's traumatized and because white men in a hat are a trigger to her because she feels like they're coming to take her back to slavery, she takes an ice pick and she runs up on Baldwin. Denver and the other ladies, they stop her before she can get to Baldwin and stab him to death. Beloved, when she sees Setha running to kill Baldwin, she realizes that Setha is once again abandoning her. So she takes off, she leaves, and goes nobody knows where. And Baldwin, he decides not to have her jailed for it. He decides to basically just let it be what it is. He still decides to take Denver on as hired help. And he decides he's just going to sell 124. Because it's too much. Denver, she is doing well for herself. She's gotten 2 jobs, and she is dating a guy who we assume to be the guy Nelson Lord, who earlier was the little boy that asked her, did her mom kill Beloved? So we assume it's that same boy because they've run into each other again and he's been nicer to her. And Paul D, he is again reflecting on his life and reflecting on what led him up to coming to 124. He and Denver come across each other. Denver is more pleasant to him, but she warns him that if he's going to go see Setha, to be mindful of her condition because she's not in her right mind. And so Paul D, he goes to visit Setha. He realizes that Setha is basically trying to take the same way out of life that Baby Shugs took. And he's like, no, you're not doing this. You're not dying the way that she died. I need you here. And basically, he and Setha, they make up, and he resolves to stick around for her because Setha makes him feel whole, and Setha makes him feel like a man, and Setha makes him feel manly. And it's from a conversation that 60 and he had, where 60 said that the 30-mile woman made him feel manly and made him feel whole and gave him the pieces that he felt that he lost. And Paul D feels like Setha does the same for him, so he decides to stay with Setha. And the book ends with the knowledge that Beloved has been forgotten, nobody remembers her, and the story is not to be passed on. And I thought that ending was like so impactful because Beloved is, yes, she's beloved, she's a person, but she's also a symbolization of like all of the beloveds who have been lost to time and their stories and their fates not been passed on for whatever reason. Usually the story of the beloveds, it's too traumatizing. They've been lost to the trauma of slavery. So, and of course, the people who lost them don't want to remember them because the way that they were lost is usually very traumatic. And so it's like Beloved's been lost to history. And I just thought that was a very impactful, like, last statement because it's like she's been lost to history, but here's her story being told. So it's like this beloved story is being told, but there are other beloveds out there whose story are not, and they're lost to history, they're lost to time, and nobody remembers them, and people choose not to remember them because her not being remembered was deliberate. Everybody deliberately forgot her because they did not want her story to be passed on. I just thought that was so impactful. That's how Beloved ended. I finished Beloved. I finished it, and my rating on Beloved, the book, is a 5. 5. I give that book a 5. I've said it before and I've said it again. Toni Morrison made me feel like I cannot write. Her writing is so good. Her storytelling is so good. Her characters are so well done. And her stories is just, it's layered. It is a layered story. It's so many layers to it. Every time you read it, you notice something new in the book. That's why I get a 5, because the story is just, it's so good. It's good. And the one thing I really like about her books is that it makes you think. When I read Sula and Love, those are more straightforward narratives. So I could read them and it didn't really take too much understanding to get the story. Beloved is a book you gotta read. You gotta read with your brain on. You can't turn your brain off because Beloved requires you to think, and it requires you to keep track of the timeline because it's constantly going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then the way stuff is described, you really have to think about how things are described. I really enjoyed it. It's a 5, and it causes you to think. The only thing, I wouldn't say my issue with it, is more so the issue with the culture surrounding the book, is that popular culture has kind of affected the twist of this book because everybody knows what the thing in Beloved is. Everybody knows what the big thing is. Everybody knows the big thing is that Setha killed Beloved and tried to kill her other children because it's based on the real life story of this lady named Margaret Garner who killed her children to keep them from going back to slavery because she thought it would be better for them to die by her hand than to die in slavery. Everybody knows that. So going into this book, I thought that was going to come like really early in the narrative. That didn't come until like at the end of part 1, which is more than halfway through the book. And so I feel like it's not necessarily an issue, but it's kind of like when you know the twist and you already know what's going to happen, it kind of takes away from that, like, that shock factor and realization because you already know what's going to happen. But what you lose in, like, being shocked and being like, oh my gosh, you gain in the knowledge of already knowing what's going to happen because you know what's going to happen. You know the twist. So you can kind of, like, see the leading up to it. You have the knowledge going in of this is going to take place. And so I guess that's my only issue with the culture surrounding it, is that pop culture has kind of like ruined the twist because Beloved is Toni Morrison's most well-known book. Like that's her like most popular books. Plus I think another thing is, as of right now, as of me recording this video, it's the only book with an adaptation, and I feel like the adaptation has kind of helped to make it more known what the twist of the book is, so it kind of like takes away from that. But that's my thoughts on the book. I loved it. 5-star read. Beloved gets a 5 from me. So, having finished reading the book, I am going to be watching the movie. Beloved was adapted into a film in 1998. Production on Beloved's film adaptation began in 1987 when Oprah Winfrey read the whole book in one sitting. Eager to adapt the story for the screen, she got in contact with Toni Morrison and the two settled on an agreed price for the film rights. Development on the movie took place until 1996 when the script was presented to Academy Award-winning director Jonathan Demme. The film was produced through Harpo Productions, Clinica Estetico, and Touchstone Pictures. It was written by Akosua Busia, Adam Brooks, and Richard LaGravenese. Beloved starred Oprah Winfrey, Danny Glover, Tandiway Newton, Kimberly Elise, and Bea Richards, and released nationwide on October 16th, 1998. My thoughts before I watched this movie. To my knowledge, I've never seen it. From what I've heard about the movie, it doesn't really capture like the feel of the book. And I've heard that the adaptation is kind of disappointing. I've heard the acting is really well done, but I've heard that the adaptation is kind of disappointing. And also, from my parents' personal experience with the movie, they didn't like it. I have a funny little story. So, when I got the book, I first bought it and I set it on top of my old bookshelf, which is shorter than this one that I have now. And so my mom, she walked into my room, and when she walked in, she looked at my bookshelf and she saw Beloved. She's like, Beloved? Uh-uh. Because she did not like that movie. She said the movie was traumatizing to her, so she did not like it. She didn't even finish it. And that's also why I didn't know who Toni Morrison was, because to this day, all I have to do is say that lady's name, and my mother will be like, no, I don't want nothing to do with her. No. So I'm like, well, maybe her experience is just going to be different from mine. Maybe I'll like it, but we'll see. We'll see. What I do know is this movie's about 3 hours long. My one hope, because this is a 3-hour movie, I hope it's not one of the movies that could have been an hour 30 and done. Because I hate movies like that. They'd be unnecessarily long. This is the way this is going to work. I'm going to rate this based on two things. The first scale is how it does as an adaptation of the source material. And the second scale is how does it do as a movie. The reason I want to do it like that is because sometimes an adaptation can be terrible. It could be straight up trash. It could be the worst adaptation of a book ever. But as a movie, it could be great. It could be amazing. It could be a great movie. So I rate it on those two separate scales. And I also need y'all to understand that the way I watch movies is broken. I'm a film nerd. I went to school to study film, journalism, English, all of that. So the way I watch films is broken. So I'm not watching it for to see how much I enjoy it. My enjoyment factors into it, but when I'm watching a movie, I'm looking at all the technical stuff. I'm looking at how did we go into putting this movie together. But my biggest thing I'm looking for an adaptation is how well did it adapt the book and how well did it work around the parts that it cut. Let's be real. An adaptation is not going to be a one-for-one of the book. They're going to cut stuff that's not going to work on screen. They're going to cut stuff that they feel doesn't work in the adaptation. So my biggest thing is how well of a job did y'all do adapting the source material and how well of a job did y'all do working around the parts that y'all cut to make sure that the story still worked. And I'll also be looking for what did y'all add? What did y'all bring to the story? What new fresh flavor did you bring to it? That's also what I'm looking for. And sometimes I'll be liking the added stuff because I'm like, oh, that makes the story more interesting, or that brings a new perspective to it, something you didn't think about before. So those are the things I'm really looking for. How well did you adapt the story? How well did you work around the parts that you cut from the adaptation? And what did you bring to the table to enhance the story? That's what I'm looking for. I finally had a chance to watch the Beloved movie. I'm rating these on a scale of 5. So 0 being y'all could have kept this, we didn't need this was unnecessary, and 5 being this was a really great movie, I enjoyed it, it was amazing. 5 stars. As an adaptation, I give this Beloved movie a 4.5. I don't understand why people say this was kind of a lackluster adaptation, because in my opinion, this was a really good adaptation of the book. This is probably one of the most faithful movie adaptations of a book I have ever seen in my life. The movie stuck really close to the book storyline. It was really good. Now, the reason it lost that half a star is not because of necessarily them cutting scenes, because it's an adaptation. Scenes are always going to get cut. Some things are not going to translate between mediums, but it's what they cut that lost it half the star. Here's the best way I can put it. If you wanted to know what the book was mainly about, the book's main storyline, then the movie is a great way to find out the book's main storyline. If you wanted to know the story of the side characters or the side plots going on in the book, then the movie's not that great for that, because the movie glosses over a lot of the side character stories and really just sticks to like the main storyline. The other reason why I understand why people say this adaptation is kind of lackluster is because with the book, you're in the characters' heads. So you can read their thoughts, you can understand what they're going through. When they outwardly react to things, we understand because we are inside their head. They can give us an explanation of why they're outwardly reacting to what they're reacting to. In the movie, we're not in their heads. And unless the movie decides to give us narration to tell us their thoughts, we're not going to get their thoughts. So we're not really going to understand why they are acting the way they are in certain situations. Denver's breakdown scene, for example. I'm kind of conflicted on this because from the eyes of Setha and Paul D in the book, her breakdown really is out of nowhere. We, the audience, only understand why she's breaking down because she's explained it to us in her thoughts before it happens. In the movie, though, it's just really out of nowhere. Like, she walks in, she's ambivalent towards Paul D. You know, who are you? You know, when Setha tells who she is, you know, she's cordial. Then she goes over to the stove, you know, she acting up a little bit, you know, oh, we got a ghost in the house, you know, trying to basically chase him off. And then she's just start breaking down out of nowhere because she's lonely. But it's like, we 10 minutes into the movie, like, where's this coming from? But so I can see why people say it was kind of lackluster because we don't really get the characters' thoughts in the movie. Even though we didn't have their thoughts in the movie, I think the filmmakers did a really great job of getting around that. I feel like the people who were behind this movie, they did a good job of adapting this book. It was really faithful to the main storyline of the book. So as an adaptation, I give it a 4.5. And I feel like they did a really good job working around the stuff that they cut out. Now, as a movie, just as a movie on its own, as a movie, I give it a 5. That was a really great movie. It was a really great movie. Let me say this. I completely understand why my mom did not like this movie. In fact, when I told her I was watching the movie yesterday, she was like, ugh. I said I was watching Beloved. She's like, ugh. So my mom did not like this movie. And I understand why. She said the specific scene she did not like was the scene where Setha is being assaulted. And I can understand because it's not like the way they show it, it's not a one and done scene. That scene, they reference it several times. It's shot from several different angles. It comes up repeatedly in the story because it's such a huge turning point in Setha's life. So I understand why she didn't like that. And honestly, it was a little much. But as a movie, I really enjoyed this movie. I really enjoyed the way that it was shot. It was just so well done. Like, the cinematography was really, the cinematography was really interesting. It kind of almost had kind of like a documentary style feel to it. They use this one shot a lot where like whenever the characters would like tell their backstory and stuff, they would be like center frame and they'd be talking directly to the camera. And that it's like the characters is talking to the other characters, but it's like they're also telling the audience their story. I really love that shot of like the center frame. They also use like shaky cam, so you get a lot of like times where like we as the audience are like looking from the perspective of the character. That was really interesting to me. I just really enjoyed the movie. I really did. The acting was really, really good. Like, everybody brought their A game. There was no weak links in the movie. Nobody was given a performance that kind of just was like didn't match the rest of the cast. Everybody just meshed really well. The writing was really good, and I agree that Akosua Busia wrote most of that movie, and the other two was just there to do some cleanup. Because, listen, I agree with her assessment, because that movie, you could tell a black woman wrote it, because she really pulled out the feelings and the emotions that the characters in the book were feeling. She really pulled those things out and put them in the movie, and it showed. It showed. The music, they had like this, you know, kind of like Negro spiritual vocalizations in the background. It worked really well with the movie. Some of my favorite scenes, the only scenes that really stood out to me with the way they were shot was the Is That You scene where Paul D and Setha first meet, where she's like, is that you? Because they used that center frame. That really stood out to me. Another scene that I really liked, that was really like interestingly shot to me, was when Beloved and Denver are dancing around the room. Really just seeing the way Denver and Beloved reacted and just interacted with each other as sisters was really interesting to see how like Denver really looked at Beloved as a sister, but like Beloved, she would swing back and forth because she's really only there for Setha, but she still showed some level of care for Denver at first. For the scene where, of course, where Setha does the thing where she kills Beloved and tries to kill the other kids, that was really well done. That scene, the lady that played young Setha, I think her name is Lisa Gay Hamilton, she perfectly captured the writing in that scene where it's like her eyes had this crazy wild look. I was looking at her, I was like, yes, that is the look. You've got it. You have the look. That is perfect. It was literally how and pictured it to look when I was reading that book. I was like, she had it. She had it. The scene where Denver and Baby Suggs is talking and they kind of gloss over Baby Suggs' life really quickly. But like the way they shot it was so well done. It's like Baby Suggs is there talking to Denver and it's right before she's deciding to go out and look for work. I really love how that was shot because it was really just like, it really emphasizes how important Baby Suggs was to Denver. And I really loved it. Baby Suggs, when she's giving her talk to the people in the woods, that was so amazingly well shot. And I really liked how I liked the warm coloring in that scene. I liked how, and it was such a contrast from the rest of the movie. The rest of the movie had like really like, I wouldn't say it was cold, but it was like, it was more neutral, like more white balance neutral, whereas that scene was really warm and really well shot, and like the diffusion of the lights and stuff, it was just so good. Another scene I really liked in Beloved was the scene where she and Setha make bread. I loved how the early morning sun filtered into the room and how Beloved was up before Setha and she was just really wanting to help Setha make the bread, because it really showcased how much Beloved wanted to spend time with Setha and really wanted to have Setha to herself, to the point that she would take advantage of whatever time she could to spend time with Setha. And I really enjoyed that scene. I really enjoyed the way it was lit and I thought it was a really good scene. The other scene that I really loved was the scene where they're all sitting down to dinner and Paul D questions Beloved on where she came from. Beloved's monologue in that scene of how she got there and the emotion she showed, it really just brought the scene together, and it really makes you feel bad for Beloved and for the fact that she didn't really get to live her life and that her life was ended early. I feel like that really shows more of her softer side of the character because it explains so much about her rage and why she's upset that she didn't get to live her life and how she feels like Setha has abandoned her and left her because she says that she has nobody. And I just really liked how that scene was done. It was so well done. I just really enjoyed this movie. I really enjoyed it. It was a 5. Now, with that being said, let's get into my notes. These next few things are going to be nitpicky, and it's only because I noticed them. The movie, of course, it opens with Howard and Boogler running off. The only thing that's funny is when they're running off, they're teenagers. And I'm like, I could have sworn they was grown in the book when they ran off. So I was a little confused at that part. I don't know. I was confused because I thought they were grown when they ran off, but in the movie they're portrayed as teenagers when they run off. The carnival scene, Denver, Paul D, and Setha are all dressed up in the movie, but in the book it was only Setha who was dressed up. And I was looking at it, I'm like, why is they all dressed up? Only Setha's supposed to be dressed up. But it was such a small minor detail that I didn't really care. And then there's this thing. It's this glass of lemonade, and this always happens a lot with drinks in clear glasses in movies and TV shows, where if they're drinking something and it's in a clear glass, you'll notice the level of drink become inconsistent between the shots. Because what it was Denver had this glass of lemonade that Paul D bought her. In the first shot, she's drunken from it, so a little bit of it's gone. When she hands it to Paul D, because he asked for a sip, she hands it to him, and it's supposed to show like she's coming around to him. When she hands it to him, it's full. And I'm like, why is it full? She just drunk from it. But then when Paul D takes a sip from it, of course now it's back to the level it was when Denver drunk from it. And so then when he hands it back to her, now the mess half empty. I'm like, come on now. Was it really that hard to keep the glass of lemonade consistent? Come on now. It was just so noticeable to me. I'm like, y'all, the carnival scene is really where I was being nitpicky with it. The shadows on the ground where it says the shadows are holding hands. I want to know how they did that, because the way it's shot, the shadows are holding hands, but Setha, Paul D, and Denver, of course, are not. But it's like it's a straight pan up. There's no cut. There's no cutting. And I'm like, how did they shoot that? How did they shoot that and edit that to make it so seamless? Because that was really good. One thing about this movie, the movie really makes it clear that Beloved has the mind of a child. A lot of her actions are things that a baby would do. Like when she first gets there and Denver, of course, is making chores so they can spend time together. Beloved start eating a baby chick. I'm like, oh Lord. The movie really made it clear that she had the mind of a baby, whereas the book, it didn't really click for me, that she had the mind of a baby until we got to her I Am Beloved section in the book. Baby Suge's speech. So I was like, the on this land from Medea's family reunion, I don't care what y'all say. Tyler Perry got inspiration for that scene from Beloved, from the Love Yourself scene with Baby Suggs from Beloved. The way it was shot, like you got the matriarch out here telling everybody love themselves, respect themselves. The way it's shot, the coloring, well, even what they had on, even got a famous old school black star. This movie had Bea Richards. That movie had Cicely Tyson. You can't tell me Tyler Perry didn't get inspiration from this movie. My final note was the book ends. It ends with Setha and Paul D reconciling, and it ends with a little basically a little tribute to all the beloveds of the world. This movie ends with Baby Suge's speech telling everybody to love themselves. And like her speech is sprinkled throughout the movie. So it's not like they saved it for the end. They sprinkled it throughout. But it ends with her telling everybody to love themselves. And I thought that was a really good change for an ending. Because you could tell this movie was targeted at Black people. And honestly, you could tell the filmmakers took a really great care telling Toni Morrison's story as faithfully as possible. And you could tell they really took care to preserve as much of her story as possible in this movie. Because the ending they gave to the movie, you could tell that that's what they were going for. Just like how Toni Morrison was writing to the hearts of Black people in her book, the movie was targeted at the hearts of Black people in the movie. That's the best way I could put it, because that ending, that's what it reflected. Now let's get into the cut scenes. These are the scenes that I noticed was cut just from watching that I can remember. The first thing they cut was the cows. Them cows was cut. They cut the cows. No mention of it, nothing. They cut majority of Sweet Home. Completely cut Mr. Garner. He not even mentioned in the movie. Mrs. Garner was seen for 2.5 seconds. In fact, the Garners and their whole attitude towards their slaves and how they treated their slaves versus how school teachers treated them, that's not addressed at all. I feel like this movie works really well with the book. If you've read the book and you know all the history about Sweet Home, if you can remember it for watching the movie, you're good to go, because you can fill in the blanks. Because they completely cut Mr. Garner. They did away with most of Sweet Home narrative. Anything, if it didn't impact Setha, it was cut. Sweet Home was really just referenced briefly in the minds of the characters. You would see little flashes. So we saw Sixo's death for 2 seconds. We saw Hallie rubbing the butter on his face. We saw Paul D in the little metal choker when he's warning Setha about what took place. We see, of course, Setha being assaulted several times. We see Mrs. Garner with that lump for a few seconds. We see school teacher. We see the scenes. But if you didn't read the book, you wouldn't know what those scenes are. You would know that they were memories of Sweet Home, but you wouldn't know the significance and the impact of them. Because they're shown really briefly, 2 seconds on screen as flashes. They cut Denver asking Paul D how long he would be there. And I feel like that cut was really significant to the plot of the movie. I feel like that's a really significant cut because they still showed that Denver was not comfortable with Paul D being there, but it's I feel like that cut specifically shouldn't have happened, because that was the moment where Paul D really put his foot down and make things clear to Setha what he was and was not going to accept and tolerate from her in a relationship. And she made that clear in that scene too. Granted, they make up for it later on in the movie by having them have a more softer scene of that. Now the scene I really wanted to see that they cut, and I was sad that they cut it, was Setha choking. I wanted to see how they was gonna handle it. They go out to the rock, they see Baby Suge's giving her speech, they do the little flashback, and then that's it, and then we go home. They cut Setha choking, and they cut Denver suspecting Beloved of being the one to choke her. I wish they would have kept that specific scene, because that really shows how Beloved wants Setha all to herself. And it really foreshadows Beloved and how she acts later on, not only in the book, but in the movie, with how she's basically punishing Setha in a way for killing her. I wish they would have kept that scene, because that scene really showcased her rage at not being able to live her life, and how she's really upset with Setha, but she still wants Setha's love at the same time. So that scene really showcased that, and I wish they would have kept it, because it worked. Maybe it wasn't filmable. Maybe that's why they cut it. The latter half of the movie saw a lot of cuts to the side characters' backstories. A lot of the side characters' backstories are referenced, and only someone who's read the book will have the knowledge to put the pieces together. So Baby Suge's storyline was glossed over. Baby Suge was completely glossed over, to the point that they cut the extravagant dinner, and they cut the whole town basically turning on her. So in the movie, she's revered in the town. They kind of upplayed her role as a pillar of the community. Instead of the family being turned on because of that extravagant dinner, it's instead they turned on them because of what Setha did. It kind of did make me sad that they cut Baby Suge's having the whole town turn on her a little bit because she was too generous. Because that showed Baby Suge's human side. And like when she got tired and when she died, like that really showed her human side. I understand why they cut it, because it's probably for time. They also glossed over Denver's backstory as well, like her wanting to go to school and the other people not liking her like that because of what Setha did. They glossed over that completely too. Denver's backstory is mentioned with her talk with Lady Jones, whose name was changed to Miss Lady in the movie for some reason. They had that kind of like come out in that little bit. And so they also cut Paul D when he left. He just left. They didn't explain where he go. They didn't explain that he went to the church in the movie. And so that whole little side plot of Stampede, feeling bad, all of that, that's also cut. And that's a result of them cutting Baby Suge's extravagant dinner. Because her dinner got cut, all of Stampede's relevance to the story, aside from being the one to tell Paul D what Setha did and ferrying Setha across to Ohio, that's cut. So of course Ella is reduced in the movie to like a little side character. So her whole resolve to rescue Setha later on is like, it's there but it's not. The Baldwin family and how they helped Setha's family and how they helped Baby Suge's, that's glossed over. They cut the whole I Am Beloved section. They didn't even go into it, like how Beloved is important to all three women. They did, but they didn't. They cut that whole section because it's evident in the movie. That's a cut I understand and why they did it, and I'm not really all that upset about it, because it's like the whole section is just Denver, she's my sister. In the movie, we see that Denver sees her as a sister. Setha, she my daughter. We see that Setha sees her as a daughter when she realized who she is. Beloved, I don't see them adapt. I didn't see how they was gonna get that. I'm not even mad at them for cutting that part. They cut Beloved's first disappearance, and when Denver freaks out that she leaves for a little bit in the shed, they cut that. So, and that was kind of like the part where we kind of seen Beloved really starting to come apart and become unhinged. And then her disappearance at the end was changed. In the book, they don't know how she disappeared, but in the movie, she just literally disappeared into thin air. But I still give this adaptation a 4.5. Even with all those cuts, I can't complain too much. Some of them impacted the narrative of the movie, but they did a really good job of cleaning it up and tying up things so that the narrative still worked. The narrative still worked. The town being mad at Setha for what she did was the main plot, and it still worked. That's why I'm like, if you hadn't read the book and you just wanted the main storyline of the book, the movie is good for that. But if you want the side characters and what they got going on, the movie's not good for that, because all of that is glossed over, is cut, is referenced briefly, and really you would have had to read the book to fill in the blanks and put the pieces together. But overall, I enjoyed this movie. As a movie, it's a 5. As an adaptation, it's a 4.5. They did a good job. They did a really good job. Thank you for tuning into this video today. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and give it a like, comment, and subscribe. And be sure to check out more content on my channel. And I'll see you next time.